Thank you for watching us. This is Rachel and Ralph's Reality Check. Ralph, as many of you know, is a longtime contributor to Newsmax and co-founder and who also runs the Capitalist League. It's got 180,000 followers on Facebook. And he also is co-author of the Capitalist Manifesto. And you all know me from my weekly contributors writings to Townhall, and I am the editor and founder of Intellectual Conservative. So this week, we are going to talk about an article I wrote, the left's red herring argument. Oh, the KKK likes you and agrees with you, therefore you are like the KKK. And then we're going to move on to Ralph's article that he wrote about how the Washington Post has finally said that capitalism is a good thing. And finally, we will wrap it up with our Blue Collar Blues segment discussing how the unions are divided over whether to mandate vaccines or not. So in my article, I basically talk about how the left is constantly saying, you know, look at this KKK member showed up at a right-wing event, or they like to tout the Unite the Right rally that happened a couple years ago back east, where a demonstrator was sadly killed by a crazy person who ran his car into her. Well, what bothers me about that is nobody ever talks about the fact that, you know, a bunch of extremists co-opted the phrase unite the right as if it represents people on the right, when the reality is everyone I know on the right didn't have anything to do with that rally. They don't know anyone who went to that rally. It appears to be organized by people who wanted to save some Confederate monuments. I understand the people who want to save the Confederate monuments are mainly Democrats. They are the ones who had these monuments put up in the first place. Like, a lot of them have been around since like the 1960s. So I don't understand this obsession with trying to lump people on the right and with the left, with these radicals. You've got all these people on the left who are more, you know, close to these radicals than we are. So anyway, I'll stop blabbing, but I want to hear your perspective on this.
No, look, Rachel, you made some very important points in your column. Okay, and let me just reiterate some of the facts here, although, you know, it's really unfair of me to actually argue from the facts rather than the faith-based fantasies that the left likes to promulgate. They're just smearing us. They are calling us racist, irrespective of the facts. And, you know, I am sympathetic to the fact that there is systemic racism that needs to be eradicated root and branch, and it's everywhere in society. And it's a serious and pernicious problem. That's my conservative point of view. But to try to imply the conservatives are somehow more racist than others, well, let me just clue them in. The Ku Klux Klan was a democratic organization, was an adjunct of the Democratic Party. The Dixiecrats, who after the Civil War, the Texas Republican Party was 98% African American. The Republican Party was the party of the liberation of the blacks. It was the party of the Emancipation Proclamation. It was the party of Juneteenth. And it was, just as a matter of history, you could look it up. The Republicans were the anti-slavery party. Okay, it's why Abraham Lincoln founded the Republican Party, to contain and eventually abolish slavery, and for the people and for the progressives to be attempting to slur us as somehow being sympathizers with the KKK is both historically and morally and politically wrong. And it reminds me, remember, Rachel, back in the heyday of the Tea Parties, which you and I were leaders of.
That's how we met.
That's how we met. Okay, there would be 1,000 Tea Partiers would show up in the Civic Center, wherever that particular demonstration happened to be. Okay, and one person would show up with a racist sign, and the media would flock to that one person and put them on TV to attempt, because the media is left leaning and wants to advance the narrative that we are the bad guys. Okay, so they would take pictures of the one, two, or three people out of 1,000 who were there with racist signs, and exaggerate the sense of presence rather than playing fair and zooming back and saying, out of the 1,000 people that we estimate are here, we only have seen two or three racist signs. And eventually it got to the point where some of our Tea Partying friends would paint signs that would say, "These are not Tea Partiers," and stand next to them with their "These are not Tea Partiers, these are plants," signs to this tiny little minority of racists who were attempting to, whether or not they were real racists, or whether. I remember back when we were doing Team Sarah, there were groups of trolls that would get together and inject racist content. This was the largest conservative social media site in the world in its day, with 1 million interactions a month. And our colleague and community manager, Bill Collier, who's very sophisticated about the ways of the web, would track these people back to their lair. And he had screenshots of them plotting to seed false racist declarations on Team Sarah, and then take screenshots of it before we could pull it down, because we were very alert to see that stuff and eradicate it immediately. We were far more proficient at getting rid of hate speech than Facebook has ever dreamed of being. And but he actually had the screenshots of them conspiring to plant false information and accuse us of racism, which he in his very sophisticated way managed to put in front of the mainstream media, who was all ready to indict us. And they, instead of running the real story, which was the radical left was attempting to slander and libel us with their false troll-like plants, which would have been the right story to tell. They just didn't run the story that we were racist, because the elite media leans left. So I think the point that you are saying, that just because there are some horrible people who want to say nice things about us, that it's a false equivalency to say that we have any sympathy toward them whatsoever. We can't control what they say. We did not invite them. We did not solicit them. We do not welcome them. And if there are any KKK left, they've withered.
And my theory was that the reason that some of these, crazies try to identify with the right is because we're the party of freedom. So they think, oh, okay, well, this is the party of freedom, so I can go spew my hate. Okay, there. And the reality is, okay, just because, we believe that they have a First Amendment right to free speech doesn't mean that we like what they say. Anybody has the right to declare themselves a Republican, but it doesn't mean that they represent us. You could be a cannibal and say that you're a Republican. And, you brought up a really good point, Ralph, the fact that these so-called examples of the right being extreme are usually planted by the left. I keep pointing out how in the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, one of the main guys instigating all this was a Black Lives Matter fellow who thought he was going to go in there and take video and sell it to the mainstream media, which he did. He made $90,000 selling that video. He broke one of the windows. I mean, this guy was a primary instigator. And so they do. You're right. They make this stuff up, and they're making racism worse is what they're doing. They're making up these incidents of racism where it's not really happening.
Well, okay, Rachel, but let me just quibble with you a little bit. In my opinion, there were a lot of horrible reactionaries who were not of the left, who were culpable in the January 6th uprising. And so I don't want to, just like we don't say, hey, two racists showed up at 1,000-person Tea Party rally, okay, and therefore we're going to indict the entire Tea Party. Okay, similarly, because one guy who made $90,000 from Black Lives Matters infiltrated this, doesn't mean that Black Lives Matters was the prime instigator of that uprising. Okay, that uprising was a horrible thing. But let me make a distinction that I don't hear enough. Excuse me, I don't hear around enough, and I hope you'll write a column about it because you're much more eloquent than we are. There is a major distinction between a conservative and a reactionary. And in my opinion, no true conservatives showed up on Capitol Hill to demand that they hang Mike Pence or to break in or to, uh, steal the notes. The QAnon shaman guy with the horns and whatever, he's now in jail in Alexandria, and his defense is he's mentally ill. Okay, that doesn't make him a conservative. That means that he's a sick puppy. So I want our listeners to understand that. I'm not claiming that it was a progressive plan. I don't buy that. But the reactionaries, the haters, the Proud Boys, and the Oath Keepers, and the vigilantes, which is really what you should call them, are not conservatives, and they are not welcome in conservative circles. And just because a bunch of psychos and vigilantes went and did all of these horrible things, that does not impute any culpability to true conservatives like you.
Well, I haven't heard any conservatives defending the people who broke the law. Basically, everyone I hear on our side basically says the people who broke the law at the U.S. Capitol should be punished, just like, the Black Lives Matter and Antifa people who break the law should be punished. They should be treated equally that way. And you bring up a third point, which I had in my column, which is that the shaman guy says he's mentally ill. Well, I point out that a lot of these crazy people who act like claim that they're conservatives are mentally ill. And if you go and you look at a lot of the mass shooters, and very few of them identify on the right, but of the very few that have any, right-leaning things that they've said or done, you can also see a huge history of mental illness. And so I believe that a lot of people who are mentally ill act out their illness in politics because they think it's societally acceptable for them to do.
Well, let me just, you're right, but just let me put a point in their favor. How many congressmen, if they were truly diagnosed, would pass the sanity test?
Well, I think a lot of people like that.
I'm just teasing.
Well, I think a lot of them suffer from narcissistic personality disorder. So, I mean, there are some issues going on. It's just I don't know the depth of them, and maybe narcissism isn't all bad. I read recently that for somebody to be a leader, you actually need a certain degree of narcissism. So.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Look at me. I'm a leader, and obviously, I've spent years cultivating my narcissistic personality disorder, so I would be qualified for that job. So you got me.
Nice try. You're not. But on that note, let's move on to your column, which is awesome. You were ahead of the Washington Post, so let's hear about it.
I scooped the Washington Post, and I'm proud of it. And I said in my column, "Where's my Pulitzer, dude?" So the fact is, I'm trying to find. I had it a minute ago, okay, and I'm gonna have it again because this was so disorienting to me because not since the Soviet Union dissolved itself on December 25th, 1991, have I ever seen something so radical. So there is not just the Washington Post, the editorial board of the Washington Post wrote on July 16th in the Washington Post, quote, democratic capitalism, for all its shortcomings, remains the greatest engine of widely shared prosperity the world has ever known. And then, if that wasn't shocking enough to see the Washington Post admiring capitalism for being the greatest engine of widely shared prosperity the world has ever known, it goes on to say the pursuit of individual wealth is not only natural, it is laudable as a reward for risk-taking, innovation, artistic creativity, and efficient production whose benefits spill over to society as a whole. Throughout history, societies that arbitrarily confiscated property failed, while those who lawfully protected it flourished. And I'm like, am I dreaming? Pinch me. This
Is,
is just,
is it because Jeff Bezos is the owner? I mean, the biggest capitalist company in the world, hello. And
yeah. Well, Jeff Bezos, I get into that in the column actually, but first comes the scoop, and that is about 9 months ago, I wrote a column about how while all the media, all of the establishment media was going gaga over Bernie Sanders, the Democratic Socialists, the track record of the Democratic Party is a party of democratic capitalism, which, by the way, was the platform that their that Joe Biden was running on, and he beat 16 other progressives and democratic socialists and whatever by running on a platform of democratic capitalism. And so I just walked the cat backward. He wasn't he wasn't the first. JFK campaigned heavily. In fact, in his last public speech before his martyrdom, he once again used the phrase, "A rising tide lifts all the boats." And he said we have to cut the top tax rate from 91% down to 70%, which wasn't low enough, but it was considered radical at the time. JFK was there for cutting marginal tax rates. And after he was martyred, Lyndon Johnson enacted that. But no, it doesn't stop there. Okay. The famous Reagan tax cuts, uh, the which dropped the top marginal rate from 70 to 50 and then from 50 to 28. Okay, that didn't come from Reagan. That didn't come from Kemp. Kemp said, let's cut everybody's tax rates by 30% across the board. Dan Rostenkowski, the Chicago Democrat, who was the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, was the guy who said, hey, let's cut the top rate from 70 to 50. He was the one who pushed that through. And then Bill Bradley, Democratic senator from New Jersey, and Dick Gephardt, a Democratic congressman and congressional leader, uh, uh, said, let's drop the top tax rate from 50 to 28%. That came from Democratic capitalists. Kemp and Reagan get the credit for pushing things in the right direction, but the Democrats get the credit for pushing the top rates down further, faster than we ever dreamed was possible.
And what was the breakdown of Republicans versus Democrats who supported that in the Congress?
The drop, I don't have the number on the drop from 70 to 50, but in the United States Senate, on the drop from 50 to 28%, it was passed by a 97-3 majority. So virtually every United States senator of both parties voted for that, including a young rising senator named Joe Biden, who voted both to drop the top rate from 70 to 50 and from 50 to 28%. And it doesn't stop there. Okay, we have Jimmy Carter, who was completely out of his depth when it came to either taxes or inflation, was Mr. Deregulation. Okay, he deregulated the railroads, he deregulated the airlines. Cheap airfare goes back to Carter's deregulation, and most of all, which is a little weird for a Southern Baptist Sunday school teacher, he started the process of deregulating the beer industry, which federal regulations had confined to like three different mega beer companies, Anheuser-Busch and Coors and one other, I don't know what it happens to be. He was the one who started the deregulation of beer. And now we have a craft beer renaissance with thousands and thousands of delicious craft beers. That Jimmy Carter started that, another Democratic capitalist. And now when you had all of these crazy lunatic fringe Democratic socialists and progressives, Liz Warren, wealth taxes, Andrew Yang, value added tax, universal basic income. Okay, you had all these loonies, and instead, the Democratic voters nominated, and then the national electorate elected the most democratic capitalist candidate of them all, among the Democratic Party at least, Joe Biden. So I'm just saying that democratic capitalism has a great track record. And you know what? I'm a Republican capitalist. We have a slightly different flavor. But, Reagan used to say, I'd rather get 80% of what I wanted rather than go off the cliff with my flags flying. And so I'm willing to embrace and forgive all of these, Democrats, as long as they are, professed out of the closet democratic capitalists who are actually pushing for equitable prosperity through capitalism. And to have the Washington Post come out and declare that as the right thing to do was like shocking and so delightful. And then I pivoted at the end to say, hey, Jeff Bezos, when you get back from the edge of space, let's you and me go out for a beer. I'll buy, and talk about having the Washington Post pay reparations to us running dog capitalists who they've been hippie punching for all these years. I'm sad to say, Rachel, this will come as a surprise to you, and certainly came as a surprise to me. I've not heard back from Jeff Bezos with an offer to sit down over a beer and discuss reparations.
Yeah, because you're one of the proles. But actually going to make any difference? I mean, obviously they wrote this to influence members of Congress, but are the Democrats ever going to go back to being the way they were as you described?
Rachel Alexander, can't you take yes for an answer? They are singing from our hymn book. The hard left Democrats, who are tiny but loud and disproportionately influential because the media just loves them up. And, they love AOC even more than I love AOC. Okay. So they're all going nuts. They're afraid that, Joe Biden really means it. And then and by the way, he campaigned on it. He campaigned consistently on it. He is singing from our hymnal. Let's take a leaf from the page of your hero, Saul Alinsky, who said, hold your enemy up to his own book of rules. He's extolling capitalism. Yes, sir, Mr. President. Now follow through. And you know what? This is my column from this week, so I don't want to. So spoiler alert. But Joe Biden just signed, and next week, by the way, just signed an executive order, which, among other things, some things I really dislike, like his antitrust enforcement. Okay, but among the things that I dislike, he had one of the most powerful supply side prescriptions I have seen since Jack Kemp left the building, and that was the elimination of non-compete agreements. Everybody who studied this in California says one of the reasons Silicon Valley became this hotbed of wealth and success and innovation is because California law prohibits you from requiring your workers to sign non-compete agreements. So you can go from one company to the next, bringing your cleverness and your innovation with you without worrying about getting sued. Until, and I suspect that this happened in the Obama administration, the federal government decided they would start prosecuting people for theft of intellectual property. Biden is the one who is he's doing a whole of government effort to eliminate non-compete agreements, which would be the most supply-sidey thing I have heard of, and wonderful for economic growth and equitable prosperity since Jack Kemp left the building. So take yes for an answer, Rachel, and then if they deviate from this, then you can hold them to account. Hey, you said you're a capitalist. What's with this? Okay, so get with the program.
I love your optimism, and I hope you're right. But I tend to be a cynic. So let's round it up with our blue collar blues segment.
There's a lot to be cynical about, but yes, what the blue collar blues is, according to today's Politico, there's a big fight going on among various unions, since there's more than one. There's the AFL-CIO, there's SEIU, there's the Teamsters, and so forth, as to whether they should demand mandatory vaccinations or not in order to get these good union jobs. They're arguing about it, and there's a bitter argument going on. Some say they should, and some say they shouldn't. I'm not an epidemiologist or whatever you call that. Okay, I don't want to get into the merits of whether they should or they shouldn't. there's a moral here for us on the right, and that is the working people of this country are not monolithically progressives. There are a lot of them who are conservative. They have conservative family values, conservative religious values, conservative patriotic values, and conservative economic values. They want high paying jobs from the demand for labor, not from artificial bad things like minimum wages. So and by the way, full disclosure, I'm a dues paying, card carrying member of the AFL CIO. And I want all of our thousands of listeners to contact me and I will sign them up to join the AFL CIO. And so we can bring forth the inherent conservatism of labor and organized labor and bring them, and come into accord with them if we represent their interests, their legitimate interests of job security and of upward mobility, all of which are good conservative values. Okay, then they'll even vote for Republicans, as distasteful as that may be. So instead of pistol whipping our working class people in organized labor, let's let's look where the divide is. Let's look at where the progressive left is. That would be the teachers unions and the university professors unions. And then let's look at the conservative unions, the ones who are, the roofers and the electricians and the people who work with their hands. And let's see where our friends are, and and let's support our friends and their legitimate aspirations. It's the right thing to do morally. It's the right thing to do politically.
Well, I would have thought that we had no shot maybe a few years ago at doing that. But what happened with minorities, especially blacks, when Trump came into office, and how he was able to, take back a significant amount of their vote. And Republicans, as you know, had really given up on winning over that vote. Way back in George H.W. Bush days, there was like no outreach to the black community. And Trump turned that all around. And that was a solid demographic for Democrats. Like, I think blacks voted something like 90% for Democrats. So if they can turn that around, you might really be onto something. And
the ethnic left are conservative. Okay, the Hispanics, the Latinos, are on probation with the progressive left because they're very pro-family, traditional marriage, pro-life, pro-religion, and so they're part of the coalition, but they're a very fragile part of the coalition. They're extremely patriotic. Okay, there have been more Medal of Honor winners from the Latino community than from any other community. They are. All we need to do is to give them the respect they deserve, not as a matter of messaging. My old friend Steve Monasteri, who was the Texas state chairman of the GOP before he went to work for his old buddy Rand Paul in the presidential election, he sent out recruiters to say, of course we want your votes. Yes, yes, yes. Of course we want your votes, but we want you to join the party. We want you to become party officials. We want you to become Republican candidates. We want you in full dignity to be our equals in the ownership of the Texas Republican Party. And do you know what happened? They couldn't put up enough tables to sign them up fast enough because they were just waiting to be shown respect, not messaging, respect. Same thing with blue collar workers. If we show my fellow proletarians the respect that they're due and give them the honor they're due. And by the way, there was a wonderful article in some left-wing publication I like to read saying that, they never make union members or workers the head of the party, the head of the party committees. Okay, that's all passed around with lawyers and teachers and other, sort of white collar types. They demand the support of the blue collar workers, but they don't show them respect. As soon as we start showing the ethnic left, Black, Hispanic, Asian, okay, and the blue collar left, okay, that the respect that they're due, they will flock to the conservative standard. They are naturally a part of our coalition, and I want them. I want every last man Jack and woman Jill of them. And Rachel, I expect you to start writing columns inviting them to sign up.
Well, I'm not as optimistic as you are, but I will give it a small percentage chance, Ralph. All right. Well, that wraps up our show for this week. Thank you for tuning in, and catch us next week.
Thank you, Rachel. Live long and prosper.